Wow, this is a great privilege for me to have you all join this conversation. Obviously, everything is being recorded. The idea is for this to be published probably in a week, just as we get the editing done and so on. But I will ask for each of you to introduce yourselves, and because it would be, I think, important for everyone who will watch this to understand where you all are coming from. And I also want to share with you the 3 questions that Greg and I had come up with to discuss. And as I said before, this is one of those rare occurrences where we're all talking, but most of us are from different disciplines. And this is wonderful to see because there's not enough of these conversations taking place. And I also see a very interesting geographic dispersal. We're in, Rick and I are in Hong Kong. I think some of you are in Arizona or thereabout, California. So it's wonderful. And the topic that Greg and I had picked and some of the questions that we had designed, they revolve around this ability to look at the, I guess, U.S. education system, but also maybe expand on different types of education systems as examples, and think about that through the lens of security and how we enable the education system, or what are some of the ways that we as security practitioners like Greg and I can contribute, and what we have been thinking about in terms of how to enable the education system for it not to be less of a threat to the future of the United States. Because what started us up on this was an article by Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, was it Admiral McRaven?
Yeah, it was Admiral McRaven, William McRaven, who was at the time the overall commander of the raid to get bin Laden, and legendary Navy SEAL, and he exited the military, and actually was, I believe, chancellor at the University of Texas for a little bit, and really understands education well, and so like some of his words point to that direction of we have to wake up in America between K through 12, because if we don't, what will happen down the road won't be too pretty.
And it's very important for you all to I think about in terms of that when we first connected, Greg and I, we know each other for many years, but what happened was that we don't want this to be just a conversation within a single industry. That's probably the most wrong approach that anyone can take, where, yeah, we're going to go preach to the choir, everybody's going to nod their heads and agree, and we're all going to walk away, and there's nothing, okay? And it's really the same issues, the same conditions exist. So what we're hoping for is really to learn from the rest of you what your thoughts have been about just the general system of education, and how we're either progressing or what are some of the issues could be. Greg and I promise that, at least from our perspective, we will share with you some of our experience, both as private citizens, as parents, but also as security practitioners, that we have been working with the education system for a long time. And this is what we're hoping to share with you, and also by extension from each of your experiences, we're hoping to learn what you've been going through and what some of your thoughts are relative to these. So we have 3 questions. The first is, I guess, through our lens, we'll try to offer to you what we are seeing as a starting point in the education system from a security perspective. And some of the ways we see progress and some of the ways we see some shortcomings. We'll also talk about what can be improved. What are some of the pathways, if you will, for the K through 12 education system to improve? We'll again offer some of our thoughts, but at the same time, we'd love to learn from you. We'll close with from each of your backgrounds, each of your experiences, what are some of the ways that you're seeing how we can enable our children? Because every time I think about it, I have two kids. My daughter is 10, my son is 16, right? And they both are subject, they've been to a US education system, now they're in an international education system. And I can see stark differences in the way they're being taught, in the way they're being enabled as our future, basically. Without further ado, Greg, because you started us all down this rabbit hole, may I please ask for you to give a 30-second introduction for yourself, and I'll ask for each one of you to contribute, and then we'll move on.
Hi, I'm Greg Schneider. I am the owner of Battle Tested Solutions, based here in Silicon Valley, where I help small, medium-sized businesses develop security programs. I chiefly work as a security consultant, and I also develop intelligence programs, as well as tactical response training. And in that, a little umbrella there, our least division on tactical response, I cover much on active shooter response, protecting, instructing and informing the end user of what to do in a crisis situation. So I've been in the game here for 20 odd years. Ilya and I share the John Jay College as our background. So you got a little bit more than 30 seconds there.
All right. As I'm looking left to right, Rick, you're up.
Hey, good morning. I actually, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing, but I'll be brief. I was a teacher for 15 years with students that had emotional needs. So kids with high anxiety and depression, and the way that affects learning was really interesting to me. So I did a master's and doctorate in education focused on teacher stress and student stress and the interaction between stress and learning. And that led me into working more and more with parents and more specialized. And so I spend almost all my time now working with kids with OCD and ADHD and anxiety issues, kids that might not have left their house for a while, and trying to coordinate. Usually kids aren't necessarily born into those difficulties. So there's a lot of work that happens with parents. And so I'm doing a lot of work coordinating parenting roles. Sometimes the kids come from high conflict families. So I'm working in that area as well.
And Julie, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Julie Morgenthal. I'm the technology director for a school district here in Phoenix, Arizona. I started my career as a teacher for about 6 years, and then I did a shift into IT. So I've been overseeing basically the development and the implementation of the district's strategic technology plan and all the district operations as far as technology system-wide.
Thank you so much. And Elio.
So I'm a software developer for the last 20 plus years. I've done EDA software, worked at Amazon, got into education and started Code Day Phoenix with Kristen Romaine. And we had almost 20 of those events, and we grew it from this little nothing of less than 24 kids to 300, almost like closing in on 400 kids. And then I got pulled into cybersecurity, partly as some stuff we did for that for the last 5 years, and have worked at the local and national level. And I'm advising about 8 different schools. Julie and Todd are at one of those schools. And the biggest thing I keep seeing that I can't wait to talk about is like the structural versus the curriculum differences. Everyone's focused on curriculum, and there's a structural mismatch in the way we do education. So I've been trying to fight that fight and convince some of these schools and admins, and the teachers and the students usually aren't the problem. It's trying to get it, the higher you go up the chain, try and get them to say like, it's got to look a whole lot different than it does now if you want it to really make an impact. So that's kind of my background in battle.
Awesome. And Christina, thank you for joining us. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Christina E. I actually co-founded a nonprofit EGX.org with Elio, and we like to say that we address the societal challenges of emerging tech. My background is as a communications professional. I spent about 12 years as a community print journalist and then was a digital communications consultant for a number of nonprofits and small businesses. I am associated with the Ball School District that Todd and Julie are associated with because on the community side, I do a lot of community and civic organizing and activism, and I am constantly advocating for school districts and, well, this school district specifically. And so that's kind of where I intersect with all this.
Awesome. And last but not least, Todd.
So my background is in accounting. I think I appreciate cybersecurity because when you've always got clients. Most of the time I've worked in private industry where their data is their business to a large extent. So it's got to be protected. Currently working for a company that has many levels of security beyond trust, and I'm very impressed with it, although it makes it a pain in the neck to use my phone. But I come at it from, looking at why are the kids in my community, what will it take to bring them up to the level that other kids are at? And it can be done, but there's funding problems, there's access to the internet problems, there's data issues, and parents who don't trust data security won't let us use data to really assess how we're doing.
Thank you, really, all of you. I'm humbled to be in your company. So my name is Ilya Umanskiy. I've been in the security industry for over 20 years. Greg mentioned that we both graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My degree is a master's degree in policy analysis. I then ended up working in the private sector and Prudential Financial in the United States, in Newark, New Jersey. That was a fun trip. And then moved on to consulting world, where I spent 11 years with Kroll, both in the United States. Kroll is a big investigations house. It investigated everything from the loss of Russian money to various oligarchs and various frauds at government levels and so on. My job was to protect people's and organizations' assets. So I helped design systems, helped coach client teams on ways of managing their assets more effectively. And I've done that both in the States, internationally, and recently for the last 7-8 years in Asia. And I'm based in Hong Kong with my family. So as I said, I have 2 kids, 10 and 16. And I look forward to learning from all of you. So may I please add this first thing to for you to think about. So we as security practitioners, it's very easy to go and drift into our kind of mindset, our professional mindset when we think about school organizations. But at the same time, we're obviously, most of us are also parents. Or it's in some level we are delivering services to school districts and we're assessing their state of readiness. And unfortunately, very painfully for us, we're also looking at the slew of incidents where kids who otherwise is very, very clear could have been helped early on and could have been pulled out of whatever it is that they struggle with, depression, anxiety, bullying. They end up hurting others or hurting themselves and others. And so we have been looking at this through the lens of, there has to be this interdisciplinary way of looking at solving this very wicked problem. Okay, and I can tell you both from the US experience and also from experience overseas. Core curriculum, as it's known in the United States, right, in the way it's delivered, can be delivered in a very, very different way. We're subject here to an international school that does core curriculum, and I can see a huge difference in the way kids are treated how they're recognized, how they're coached and guided to be good citizens, good people, with kindness and with very deep values. And my experience in the States has been mixed, I must say, both as a practitioner and as a parent. And I'll give you one example. It was a conversation with a group of educators, including the head of the school, at a school that by any account can be considered extremely fancy. Okay, it's in an expat-rich area of New York City, very highly regarded. Parents are, falling head over heels, about the way the school operates. And it was a conversation with a group, as I said, a group of educators. There were probably 7 or 8 people at the table. And this is what struck me. Not a single person had their eyes up. Not a single one of them. When we were discussing a fairly important, it was security and also kind of administration-related matter, right? Every single one of them was on the phone. Every single one of them was distracted by something else. And when they did have a chance to speak, they were so disjointed in the way that they were each of them thought about the issue. There was no synchronicity. There was no kind of administrative alignment, if you will, in the ways that the school operated. And what I started noticing shortly thereafter was how the facade is there. You can see that, the head of the school, background, beautiful resume, everything's great. Vice principals, fantastic, young, very energetic. And yet, multiple examples of teachers bullying children, of a single child is sitting in the classroom on their phone. Classroom is completely empty. The first action from a teacher is to call security on that child. Why? Because they're sitting in the classroom. Okay, so just consider, how for a school that otherwise has a fantastic facade, great reputation on paper and online, but when you lift the rug, and this is what we've been doing as security practitioners. Our job is to really lift the rug on a lot of these things. And this is what I observe. May I throw this to the group? Can you please share with us, what are you observing in terms of enablement for children through changing through some innovative practices, really looking beyond facades in the school districts and on administrative teams, and what challenges and opportunities are you seeing? Can I ask you to share with us?
This actually touches on my favorite subject, if I could. And that is at one of our schools, we implemented mindfulness. And it's simply teaching some basic meditation techniques to the kids and letting them know that there is space for them if they start to get stressed out or anxious. There is a space for them to go think about things and just, kind of get recentered. I think it's doing great. It's reduced our discipline levels. When it's discussed in the community, people tend to think that it's trying to indoctrinate their children to a type of religion. So that's another challenge we have, trying to get that out to all the schools.
So there's something I'd like to add. And one of the issues, like you mentioned some issues like OCD and not as much ADHD. One thing that I see is that schools, and I don't know, there may be some pushback from some of the educators here, but schools seem to be oriented more at standardization. And we needed people for the industrial age. We needed to turn out a standardized product, someone who could go, put in a solid 8-hour day at an assembly line. And when you try to make everyone into the same standardized mold, then there are people that just don't fit well into that mold, and they're your quote troublemakers. But when you, like any tech team, you want a diverse set of people on that team, because one of the things that we talk about when we're advising kids and just businesses, if you have a homogenous team, someone who gets stumped by one problem, if everyone's the same, they're all going to get stumped by that problem and the team's going to get stuck. So if you have people with different backgrounds, you'll be able to find someone who can actually easily solve the problem. Oh yeah, that's easy. I know how to do that. And so it's really advantageous to have people with wildly different backgrounds to be able to solve different aspects of a large problem. And so I think the time for standardization and this idea that kids that don't want to, I wonder why they don't want to sit still and just mindlessly memorize stuff. It's shocker. That seems like a ton of fun. Like these are not actual behavioral issues. These are indications that there is a structural mismatch. And the stuff that we're going to need as more and more jobs get automated away by machine learning, because AI is not a thing, but ML is very powerful. And the new term that I learned from Albert Fattal at a conference is intelligent automation, IA. That's a big thing. And there's already a ton of jobs in law, in journalism, all over the place that are falling to intelligent automation because they're jobs that are pretty repetitive, like writing articles. This one's, I think, 5+ years ago, they came out with a piece of software that would go ahead and write articles, financial articles. It would just suck in the feeds from the stock market, correlate a few things, and just spit out little blurbs of financial text, a paragraph or two. And instead of having 4 or 5 people you're paying, I don't know what the average pay is, but let's assume like $40K a year, you're looking at $20K for the piece of software, no benefits, no downtime, no insurance. Just turn the knob on how many stories you want it to crank out a day. Like there's a ton of stuff that's going to go that way. So the jobs that are going to be left in an IA powered world are the jobs that require creativity, that require empathy, that require unique things that only humans can do, that just today's ML and AI, if you want to use the trendy thing, just they can't do that. If they ever can do that, it will be 50 to hundreds of years away, but it won't be soon. And so that's what we should be focusing on, is honing and focusing those skills in today's kids rather than trying to eradicate those skills and standardize them to do menial labor, just repetitive stuff. It's just not useful anymore.
I saw Julie try to offer her thoughts. Could you please share with us?
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, no pushback. I actually agree completely in that I feel that schools, I will honor the idea that schools definitely, there is pressure to perform, on standardized tests and that. And particularly when funding and labels and that sort of thing are attached, that is, schools feel a tremendous amount of pressure. However, we do see models of learning like challenge-based learning and project-based learning and other models that teachers do utilize in their classrooms where students are encouraged to work through projects and encouraged to think, and students are empowered to choose their own ways of demonstrating learning, of demonstrating their own learning, I should say. And you can see the difference when students are coming out of these environments and their ability to work independently, seek out solutions, work through problems, as opposed to students who are very used to deadlines and tasks. Those types of students who have been through the system where they're just doing deadlines and tasks are very resistant, and it's very difficult for them to adjust to that challenge-based approach. And I think that's a big area where I agree. I feel like we at BALT in particular, we have a computer science program, and that program is very constructivist. Kids are allowed to move through at different paces, work through different types of projects, and they're not necessarily working at the same on the same activity. And some kids will group together and finish, and others will work on their own. And that at the beginning made a lot of students and teachers very uncomfortable, just trying to navigate. And I think on the larger scale, when you're talking about across all contents, the more project-based, thoughtful, challenge-based kind of learning opportunities we can provide, I think that's going to prepare our students for better outcomes in the future for sure. Because as we all know in our tech jobs, there's usually not one solution. It's usually about seeking, trying, risking, working, and it's persistence, reaching out, other experts. That's really how you get it done. And I feel like that's probably in most areas of the workplace. So I feel like there's hope, and those models are out there, and they're out there in every system. And, great teachers are using them. I think it's just that shift away, maybe where we're so deep into the testing and the labeling and that sort of thing. It definitely puts a lot of pressure.
So,
Christina?
yeah. So I'm just going to add something here. I don't know if it would consist of pushback, but having covered, 4 state legislatures and over a dozen school districts, I will say there is, and I'm not endorsing, I agree with everything everyone else has said here about a more organic and dynamic learning environment. I am a non-traditional person. I dropped out of high school and went to correspondence school. So I am 100% all about non-traditional learning. However, I will say there is a practical component here that does need to be acknowledged, because at the end of the day, you have state legislatures who are receiving federal funds, and those funds have to be dispersed. And you can't just, call in a group of 10 parents and the parents say, hey, this school's great. Okay, you get more funding. There is a actual mechanism here that needs to be applied, right? And I am not for metrics fixation. I do terrible on standardized tests. I hate them with the fiery passion of 1,000 burning suns. However, I do, on a practical level, you have to acknowledge there has to be some mechanism for which macro structures to allocate funding, to allocate resources, and in which to also reward and incentivize like good methodologies. So I think Walls is actually a great example of that, because as a community organizer, I'm actually head of the neighborhood association of the Block Watch. I'm constantly telling parents, to give schools a chance, and the schools have improved greatly. It is a phenomenal district. There are dedicated teachers. You have amazing administrators. And I like to make the differentiation between an administrator and an educator. And I will say Falls has administrators who are educators first. However, if you look at the metrics, it's not necessarily going to reflect that. And I am constantly telling parents in my community to at least go tour the schools, talk to the teachers, look at the school itself before whether or not you're going to send your kid there as opposed to a charter school. And I think about 8 kids that go to Balls now that are probably because of me. But again, so I definitely acknowledge the detriment of metrics fixation and using that. But there has to be a mechanism of governance with which to create. At the end of the day, schools are a system. And I think part of the problem, which is a whole nother thing we could get into, but I'm not going to take up any more time, is the politicization of governance. I think that's a huge problem. I think a lot of government mechanisms that should be more empirical and objective have become politicized. And then that's been encroaching of government mechanisms. And that, I think you see that with school districts more than any other facet of society. I think that's where it's been the most harmful, with the exception of possibly public transportation. So, yeah.
Cool. So Greg, you and I will be last because, I have lots of stuff to share with you guys on the basis of what you're sharing with us. But may I please turn to Rick? Rick, I'm a big fan. For why. And I think that the thoughts, if you guys haven't followed Rick on LinkedIn, please do. But I think I started learning as a parent in many ways from Rick's thinking and how to be more empathetic, how to just shift your mindset as a parent first, because kids model after me as a parent, after myself and my wife as parents. And so can you please share with us your thoughts? You've been exposed to global education. You've seen what's going on stateside. So please.
And when you brought up the mindfulness program and the pushback, it's interesting that there's also pushback on every new website that rolls out and every new way, like this online learning, and it's almost like it. I think one thing that really sticks out to me is and Ilya, you said it, education is commodified. It's people want. I've had the luxury of attending a top 10 university and also just a state junior college, and it's not like there's better facts at the other universities. That we all have the same stuff, and really one of the differences that I think kids are faced with today is that the real high skilled jobs are actually being transferred to low wage workers. And so you can find, if you look at university rankings, for example, it's really hard to find a top university in a place like Germany, which is a super high wealth economic powerhouse. But if you look at a low where the universities are really top. Say, let's say Singapore, they have some really top schools. Hong Kong is graduating some of the highest test takers in terms of scoring in the world. I think they're in the top 5 for the past like 15 years on some of the PISA tests. And yet it's almost impossible to grow up in Hong Kong and get a job in a big company because so many of these high skilled jobs are kind of auctioned off to the lowest wage. And we're not just talking factory jobs anymore. I mean, like any tech support job or tech support that I've ever had is rarely does it take somebody in Ohio answers the phone. It's almost always a foreign country. And I think what that speaks to, when Todd brought up mindfulness and the pushback, is that school is really, there's a huge part of school that's like reproducing norms and values. And what's interesting to me, so I work with kids from all countries, but what's interesting is that they all have the accents of their friends. Like they don't carry their parents' accent. And I've always found that really fascinating, that sometimes by the time they're a teenager, they can do impressions of their mom or their dad, but that's not how they talk. And when I think of technology, I think of it as like a form of language also, or mindfulness is a form of language. So kids might pick up these new skills or these new languages, so to speak, and they go home and their parents just don't understand what they're speaking about, and quite literally with technology. So, there was in that article that you sent over, McCraven said they won't have, I wrote this down, McCraven, they won't have an understanding of different cultures. They won't be critical thinkers. And that's completely right. And I think that's because so much of schools, when I first started teaching, it was in Tampa, Florida. You could literally just, if you were to fly in a helicopter over the school district, you could see which schools were the good schools and which schools were the bad schools, just based on the shape of the neighborhood and how many cars were sitting in the front yards. And so, kids go to school and they learn the norms and they learn the rules and the values. Like, do we use our phones in public or not? Do we say yes, sir? Or do we call teachers by their first name? Which, when I came to Hong Kong, in the international schools, it was like a first name basis, and that was so weird to me. But it's really, there's so much more that goes on than in the learning or even the reproduction of knowledge, or trying to like write essays or generate science reports. There's also like, how do we interact with the teacher, and what do we think about authority? Are we collaborative or are we independent? And these sorts of things, I think, really play into a lot to what the conversation I'm hearing so far is that kids are taking on, kids are completely aware that the future is automated in a sense. What they're not aware of is that there's, like I think if I were to tell any of the kids that I work with that they are in the top 1% of the world, like how that they get to go to school, and not that they have to go to school. It's really quite a luxury. That concept just seems to just blow their minds, that school is something that's, privileged access to be able to do algebra, trying to convince a 13-year-old that algebra is a privilege, and it just blows their mind. But I think if they were to see anywhere else in the world where school is like, a luxury good, or private education is a luxury good, you can really see the disparities. Like you can see the disparities in their talk. Like it's just so far beyond their imagination that kids aren't like them. I mean, the whole world revolves around you when you're 13, right? So I think one thing that I've really noticed is the way that kids will surround themselves and kind of insulate themselves into their school culture, and it's almost a part of identity. And it's just sort of a given if you're from a certain school that you'll have a certain life path, like it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a top school or a bottom school or, a great university or a bad university. It's more about, like race and culture is I think what the data shows, like going back to the examples of Germany, there's not a single university that's in a top 10 or in any metric in Germany. And they're pretty much the economy of the EU kind of sits there. And so then the same the opposite also seems to apply. You could go places like India, great universities graduating really top students, and it's just so rare that you're going to see those students with high skills break out of that low wage world.
Mm. Mm. Thank you for sharing it. Before I share, I'm absorbing like a sponge everything you've said. It's so. I'll explain why it's so validating, why it's so great to hear your thoughts. But Greg, may I offer the stage to you so you could share with us what you're thinking?
Oh, well, I may go backwards, but to go backwards, let me go explain my present, in that I'm a parent of 3, a 13-year-old, 10-year-old, and incoming kindergartner. And not an hour and a half ago, I had to fill out a form to say what's instructional model that we want with this pandemic, meaning, okay, it's going to be stay at home until it's deemed somewhat safe, and do you want a hybrid type of learning or just completely distance learning the whole year, or you have the option of like withdrawing and just doing online learning but somewhere else through a different platform, online platform, not through the school district. So just had to sign off on that, and we're doing hybrid learning. Where my kids have gone to school, and that this is my observations, because I'm not a quote unquote an educator, apart from teaching about terrorism, intelligence, and executive protection. But just from my observations with my own kids, I do like where they at the schools, at least my older 2 have gone to, and that they do reinforce how to treat your fellow student. Everyone's pretty nice. There's none of these fist fights or anything. It's K through 5. My older one had a bit of a language delay or auditory learning problem. Unfortunately, the school district didn't really give him the necessary resources, put him in a special ed, but that wasn't really what he needed. Just needed a few things just to hone. And we had to sue the district, and he's now getting the help that he needs. But one of my other observations is I look at myself, and again, this may be apples and oranges, but if we go back 35 plus years or something, to when I was in elementary school, at least, 3 through 6, 3 through 6 in Connecticut, public school, middle class neighborhood, maybe upper middle suburb of New Haven, Connecticut. I had a bus take me to school. My school, play yard, diverse, mostly white, but I'd say about 85% white. With some, Asian and some Hispanic and a few African American students thrown in. But starting in 4th grade, we learned French. 3 years, 4th, 5th, 6th, French. We had art class, we had music class. I eventually went on to a private school. But I look at my children's experiences. So there's no bus in California. That'll take you, so that's off. There's no French lessons or anything. There is art, but that's something that the teacher kind of does. Is not an art teacher. That's gone. And music is done after school. It's not part of the curriculum. It's an elective. So some of the things, I guess, my parents' tax dollars got them. Again, it was Connecticut, which is one of the higher taxed states in the union, delivered a certain experience. But yet, so many years forward, and you think with advancements on certain things, that a school would offer that type of baseline type of education and more. But I am fortunate where we live, because it is very, very diverse. I'm in Silicon Valley, people from all over the world. So a lot of my kids' classmates are children of really sharp people, engineers and what have you. And so I don't think math scores are the problem in this district. But still, like, what the school should be offering, it's an issue I've always made. Like, I remember reading the Call of the Wild in 4th grade. And that's like, no, we're not touching it. We don't touch that. So that's just my observations of where education once was, and now where it is. Where, okay, let's just check boxes and got your work. We do the Common Core, you're okay, good. No, this is how you do long division. It's not like that. It's like this. And so I'm kind of playing catch up on that part. But and I could, like, as a parent, just only hope, okay, they're going to get the necessary social skill sets, but also that the academics to go forward and just understand, be prepared for, in 10 years from now, what the job market's going to be.
So it's interesting to hear all of you, and you each, I think, can see how diverse our experiences are, and what we each are observing. And I love what Christina also said, is that at the end of the day, the school system is a system. Okay, so here's an example for you of what happened that I observed recently, and it's an international school, group of parents. Okay, and we're all listening to the head of school talk about all sorts of things, testing and how the curriculum is delivered, and so on and so forth. The school has this policy, assume positive intent, which to me was a revelation. Okay, this is the first time that I've heard an educator really say that out loud, and also really practice it. I see the school practice it on a daily basis. But here's a parent who is in the group of parents who are receiving this information from the head of school. And I happen to ask about critical thinking, because I feel, Greg and I, we're looking at the incoming job seekers. We're looking at new talent. I constantly evaluate new talent that is graduating universities, that is kind of moving up. I myself managed interns. And so my concern has always been critical thinking. So I asked that question without even giving the head of school a second to reply. One of the mothers says, critical thinking is not a problem at the school. Okay, so as security practitioners, we receive what feedback you're having to offer to us through your lens. And what I find very challenging is when we design our solutions. For example, every school has an active shooter training, lockdowns, lock-ins, and what have you. That is, let's say, mandated by the system, whatever. But I'm hearing from each of you that the schools are really, really diverse in the way they're being administered, in the way that the curriculum is being developed and delivered, in the way the teachers operate and how they interact with children. And here we are, security practitioners, who are saying, wait, we have one program for everybody. Okay, and here we are, security practitioners, who are still, for many, many years, lamenting about the fact is, why do we have school shootings? And how do we put more people with guns in schools? Okay, without having to take a step back and say, wait a second, we have a problem with parents dismissing somebody else's opinion out of hand. We have a problem with parents not understanding what active parenting is. We have a problem with the parents playing this game of parent-teacher organization and organizing fairs that are completely meaningless for the children's development, children's social skills. In fact, try to find a child that is, other than volunteer, at these fairs having a wonderful time that they otherwise could have with their friends. Okay, that's also a mixed bag, if you will. And so that brings a challenge to us as practitioners as to how do we assess schools. So when somebody says to us, because we get this all the time, oh, go assess a facility, all you need to do is really interview the administrative team, talk to a few teachers, and then look at the building and look at the surrounding environment, right? What we're missing as practitioners is those nuances of how are kids treated, okay? Do we have more nudges for children to become violent? Do we have more nudges that, let's say, the teachers actually themselves are bullies and they can't get past their own egos, their own psychological development, their own lack of social skills to actually interact with children and accept them for whatever characters they have, right? And one of the big gaps that I would see, if I were, again, to apply my skills to, let's say, evaluating a school district, I would want to also understand what is the gap between where the school administration is headed, with what practices, what new systems and new tools they're introducing and new educational methods they're introducing at school, and this gaping void between where the school is going and what the parents think. Okay, because I can tell you, until I took an active parenting class, right, and apparently there is a big system, it's been in existence for a long, long time. I only learned about it last year. I'm not kidding you. Okay, and my comment to the educator, that I was actually at our school, they were teaching us here in Hong Kong, this system of active parenting. And I said to them, do you guys understand that when I go to the office and when I come back from the office having all the stress from work, that my kids probably will not model the best behaviors because I'm stressed out and I bring my baggage from work interacting with adults in not very nice ways, okay? And I come back home and without any advanced training, advanced knowledge of how to be, this active parent, I go and I model whatever behaviors there are. And that educator who was teaching us, he had to stop. He said, Ilya, we never considered it. We never looked at how parents act outside of what we see as educators. Like, what kind of baggage do they have? What kind of social emotional skills do they have? So I want to ask you, so assuming that educators and children do need this connection when they're on school premises, how do you see parents being involved at a higher level? Like, I would love to ask that question as a security practitioner next assessment I conduct. Okay, how do you introduce parents to your school organization? What kind of a role do they play? And what kind of continuity do you build between what you teach at school and what you expect to see at home? Okay, so what are your opinions about involvement of parents beyond our quote unquote PFO or parent PTA, whatever that is? Would you please share with us?
There's a big difference between involvement and engagement, and I want to point that out, not as a form of semantics, but to say that I think a lot of parents get the message from primary years that in being involved, reading time at class or hosting a birthday party or something like that is where the payoff is. And then there's parents that will never come to the school. Maybe they don't speak the language, or they don't culturally fit in, or like cultural minorities might not even come in. And yet at home they're very engaged, and they're really they're sitting down with their kids and doing the work, or they're at the very least like mandating a dinner time and some sort of conversation to check in with their kids. And one of the ways that plays out as the kids become teenagers that I see is that the avoidance behaviors that you talk about, like maybe you come home and you're just like, I'm just stressed, I need to just go and have some time by myself. I see teenagers that the parents will say, oh, he's addicted to gaming. This just happened this week. The parents said, I took away all our technology. I should have done it a long time ago. And can you please reinforce that when you talk to her? And I said, absolutely. What options does she have for play and socialization? So I can bring that up as well. And it was just silence for 3 or 4 days, and came back and said, like, what options does she have aside from the laptop? Silence for 3 or 4 days. And so the takeaway for me from that is that you have a parent here who's very involved and interested, and so she's outsourcing all the teaching to different tutors and getting me to help her with some avoidance work. And then at the same time, there's no alternative for her to do anything. Like there just isn't an option. And so she looks to her parents and like, well, what are you doing with your time? And it's just avoidance. And so then the parents will say, oh, my kid is chronically gaming, totally avoiding everything. Okay, well, what else can they do? I don't know. And I see like a lot of parenting like happening as they're on their phone, the same way you were saying when you were giving your talk. There's if every single time as a toddler the kid cries and an iPad shows up, it's not a surprise that when the kid is feeling bad as a teenager, they want an iPad. They want technology. And so that sort of social modeling and like coping skills comes more from engagement than involvement. And, how do I deal with frustration is a question that a parent might want to ask out loud to their kids. I'm feeling frustrated right now, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to journal for a few minutes about the things that are on my day. And I'm going to just try to step away from that and transition. Or how do parents model even transitioning? I mean, that's so important. Like how do you walk away from work and into your house? It's not necessarily about integrating it, but just switching activities. Because kids really, for them, it's just one long day. Like they're doing schoolwork at school, they're doing homework, the schoolwork at home is homework, they're talking about it, and then they're going to bed. So even modeling, like, we all need to transition into a dinner time right now. And so what we're going to do is we're all going to put our tech into a bowl on the side of the table, and we're just going to ask each other one question each. Something like that, where the parents can learn how to be more engaged, and then they don't actually have to be so involved with the school. And I say that because the schools will give such mixed messages to parents that, parents might think that their kid will get preferential treatment if the cupcakes show up on Friday. And I think that's a reality for a lot of parents, and as a strategy to kind of support their, if a bad note goes home, for example, the parent returns with, oh, we're so sorry, this and that. But there's really never any like modeling. It is with the kids I work with of here's how we want to be more involved. Who do we want to be, regardless of who the teacher is? What a powerful conversation that would be. I mean, so many kids get out of doing homework or get out of doing their schoolwork because they say, oh, it's a bad teacher, or he's rude to me. And there needs to be a conversation, I think, of like, how do we want to act regardless of what shows up every morning? Who do we want to be?
Thank you. Fantastic. Julie.
I think we have to be cautious with the idea of scope creep, like we think of in IT, right, with regard to the role of teachers and educators. And I'm going to kind of take this from two different perspectives. So if I age myself and think back, as Greg was mentioning before, when I was in school, if something came up, my biggest concern was that my parent, would be contacted. And the idea was that my behavior and any other issue I had at school would come back on the parent, to deal with. And we've shifted a little bit over the years to, if I remember, back in the day, right, they would say, what's happening to the family, right, piece of parenting and people parenting children. And then as we've moved forward through the years, it now comes back down to the teacher. So if a child is having an issue, teachers definitely play a huge role. But we also have to remember that teachers have limited time and educators have limited time with those children. And so they can address the needs in schools, particularly, for example, in Balts, we take a lot of measures to deal with social emotional issues with children and dealing with, we have a lot of resources that we pull from to make sure that their needs are met in so many different ways. But at the end of the day, teachers and educators have a limited amount of time with the kids. And parents also have busy lives as well. And then when I look at it from a parent perspective, my own kids, for example, in the district where I work, we push out a lot of opportunities, a lot of communication. I guess you could call that more engagement, right? A lot of communication through social media, through other means, to make sure parents know what is going on. My own children's school, they do the same thing. However, as a parent, I'm also working all day in a very intensive job. Like what you're saying, I'm busy. Sometimes I work 10, 12 hours a day, and I might not get home to deal with all of their different issues. I did take a parenting class when my children were younger in a Montessori type, they made us all, it was actually made us, see, they required parents to take a parenting class. And the most powerful thing the teacher or the person in the class said to me was, you don't have to answer questions immediately. As a parent, you don't have to react to your child. You can wait and the next day address the issue. And I can't tell you how many times with my own teenagers I've done that, in that I want to respond, but then I go, hold on, I've been at work all day. This is a weird situation. And once I sleep on it the next day, I say, hey, remember we were talking about that thing? Let's talk about it a little more. Now I'm ready, right? And so I think we have to be careful in that teachers have responsibilities and educators have responsibilities, but parents also have responsibilities. And I feel like school systems are powerful and they can offer so many resources and do so many things, but they also have limits to their resources and their ability. And they also are limited in their control of families. We can't force families to do certain things, and we can't, you can only offer and try and help and give opportunities, but you can't go out into the community and drag people in, you know? And I say that as a parent, if the school came to me and tried to drag me in, right? We have to choose, I guess, where our energy goes as educators and as parents, because everything comes in finite limits. And the best, I would say Balts is one of the really, it's a very impressive as far as what we try to do as far as our resources and our attempts. But at the end of the day, everything is finite. And I think we have to always be aware of that.
Thank you. Fantastic. Anyone else?
Well, the big challenge is engagement. And it's a challenge with families who, in our district, it's, well, I think 85% poverty. Most of the parents, as far as I can tell, all the parents work. A lot of, both parents will work, or one parent might work 2 or 3 jobs. I see engagement, the best engagement where it starts, I think, in the parenting training opportunities we have come in very limited Head Start programs that we are not big enough for all of our families to benefit from. And maybe, and then I think about engagement from the terms of the kids and their equipment. So if a child, Rick or Greg mentioned, if the kid, every time they cry, they get a laptop, then that's where, it was Rick, and that's where they make their connection, and maybe what we need to do is engage that laptop with the parents in the Head Start program. So the kids, by the time they're coming into 1st, 2nd grade, they're a little more tech savvy. They know the difference between, and some of that's critical thinking, knowing the difference between a good website and a bad website. And yeah, so I think, getting them engaged the proper way. So many of our kids who are not engaged in education wind up being engaged with games. That's where they find their family.
I have lots to say.
Okay.
So she hesitated. You had your chance. No, so what Rick was saying about, I've heard that too, where people are looking at, like, this kid's addicted to gaming. And I actually posted a link in the chat there, and there's a great graphic, and the article's on, I think, the Daily Mail. It's called How Kids Lost the Right to Roam in 4 Generations. And they show over 4 generations in England, this map with some overlaid stuff. And at the same age, which I can't remember, if it's 8 or 10, someone can read the article and correct me, they used to be able to go miles and miles, like almost anywhere in the town. And that radius has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And I've actually read articles of, like, mothers being arrested because the kids were playing in the cul-de-sac and the mom was on the porch, and a neighbor got nervous and, oh my God, these children are unattended. She's within eyesight, within a short sprint of her kids, but it's too dangerous for them to go outside. So yeah, of course they're retreating into the online world. What else do they have? And I remember, I'm not that old, but still got some autonomy, could still walk a few blocks away in the neighborhood. We could still actually have play. And I got really lucky in terms of just childhood. I went to 2 Montessori schools. My mom actually has 40 plus years teaching. She has an EDD, and she taught early childhood development. She just recently retired. So she read about stuff in the beginning of her career that is finally, it's funny because she's like, oh, that's becoming popular again. Cool. like we were talking about that in the 60s and 70s. Glad they're maybe ready to start trying it now in 2020. Maybe we'll see. But one of the schools, the second school I went to from 1st through 4th grade, when you talk about parental involvement, there's this idea in a lot of the schools that I've worked with and, had in passing at different meetings and committees. There's this idea where the parents are like, here, make my kid smart. And it's like, that's not how that works. There has to be, everyone has to be on the same page. So the second Montessori school I went to, there was huge parental involvement. And in fact, this is a private school, but if you wanted your kid to go there, they would actually interview the parents. They're like, don't bring your kid. We're going to spend 2 to 3 hours, and we're going to make sure the parents, like, you are really heavily invested in being part of our community and being part of your child's education. Because if you're not, there's not a lot we can do. I mean, we can do a little bit, and we can treat the kid well while they're here, but they're not really going to hit their potential if you're not going to be part of this. And they didn't even do grades. at all ever. They just assumed, like, what does a grade tell you? There's a whole issue with, to use fancy terms, dimensional collapse. When you take a whole bunch of dimensions you're measuring something on and then try to integrate that into a single number, you lose a lot of information. And for that one analysis, it's valid, but you lose all the other nuance that would be valid for other types of analysis. So when you try to get like an overall GPA for a kid, it means almost nothing when you try to average that all together. So their approach was just, hey, look, you're going to show up, you're going to pick your kid up at the end of the day. Our class sizes are like 12 or less. So yeah, just take 2 minutes, talk to the teacher. And yeah, well, if they're going through times tables, we'll tell them, he's doing great on the 9s, but you got to practice the 7 and 8s. Like, he's having a little trouble there. And there would just be daily updates, at least 2 or 3 times a week. And then the whole school would have events we put on together. So there's a community aspect. And that's something where, when I first met Christina, I met her because she was doing community organizing in my neighborhood. And I got tired of driving to the far reaches of the metro area in Phoenix to help out with schools that I was literally an hour drive away from in good traffic. And I'm like, wait, let me start doing stuff in my own neighborhood. Might as well at least fix up stuff right around me instead of always doing the other side of town. And there really is a community element that I think we've somehow lost. Like, people are more isolated, even though we have more and more ways to connect, we're more and more isolated. And there's no shortcut there. You've got to have community. If you want good outcomes, it's not just a simple formula where you can just say, here's my kid, or even just, I see the same thing in security where there's this insane fixation on certifications. I had one committee throw a 1-inch stack of paperwork in front of me, and they're like, we'd like you, and this was me and a whole group of people. They're like, we'd like you to go through and tell us what certifications are good. And I flipped through about 5 pages. I'm like, I have only heard of 2 of these, and they don't mean a lot to me. So yeah, I don't know how many thousand are in here, but only 2 even. I wouldn't use any of these to actually assess someone's knowledge. I would spend 5 minutes talking to them, and it's pretty quick. When you talk to someone, you can get a very good idea how they operate and where they're at. But the problem with this is, it's not just metrics fixation. It's, we've become addicted to cheap metrics, multiple choice tests, things that can be run through a Scantron reader. It's really hard to assess important aspects of someone's, how they operate, their personality, et cetera, without spending the time to actually talk to them. And so I don't think it's impossible necessarily to measure what matters, but I think it's not cheap. It takes more time. It takes more of an investment. And so we've turned that into an industry in order to maximize profit. Everyone's focused on all the cheap metrics. And if we want real progress, we got to start getting quality metrics, not just cheap stuff.
It's interesting how you use the word investment and people seeking a return. I feel like when it comes to parent involvement, I think it's mentally or conceptually, it's framed the same way. Parents might say, like, well, you don't understand. I've been coming here every summer for 6 weeks and teaching, so I'm going to need that special math teacher. And it's like, that's not actually how it works. Like, or they want the endorsement, or they want the recommendation letter, and those things are acceptable. But the same attitude seems to transfer when they go to apply to a university, for example. And they say, well, look, we've been paying $60,000 a year for this fancy education, and it turns out it's just the same education the kid could have gotten at the public school if there was a highly engaged parent involved. But the people want a return on their investment of time as well, and their engagement.
Yeah, and it's zero-sum thinking, which is, not everything should be seen as zero-sum. And when you limit yourself to that frame, you have to phrase questions in a certain way. And there's just a thing earlier today on LinkedIn where there's a discussion about the recent interview with the heads of technology and the congressmen, and whether they're questioning them well and all this. And there used to be, more than just shareholder profits, like maximizing shareholder returns. There used to be, what is this doing for our workers? What is this doing for the community? Are we building a decent legacy? There used to be multiple dimensions. When companies would make decisions, they would consider a lot more than just what it did for the shareholders. And that whole idea of just everything is shareholder profit, everything is simple monetary returns, I think has kind of infected our society. And there are just a lot of problems that are totally out of reach, that you just can't really do anything meaningful when you're stuck in that mindset. So I think if we want a lot of change, we can't just lay this on the school system. It's a societal mindset that we have to address to start making real progress.
Well, and I'd like to point out, if I may. So one thing this conversation is bringing up for me, and I don't know if it's really like a question or maybe it's a facet that I kind of want to direct to. So my parents were not involved in education at all. Like my mother would not get out of the car when she picked me up. They didn't attend school plays. They didn't do any of that. And that definitely had like a certain degree of impact. Now, I will say some of that at least was partly cultural. Some of it was not. My parents were both post-war immigrants from Berlin, Germany. There's just a very mindset of like, you just do what the teacher says, you don't question them. This notion, same thing with doctors, which made, now they're older, and even just getting them like medical care is difficult to get them to like ask the doctor a question. You know, like it's a conversation. You don't just sit there and they tell you what to do. I've done some work. The area we're in has a high immigration population from Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and there's a little bit of that mindset there too. I actually organize classes to teach them how basic governance works and how to vote and things like that. And you kind of get that same mindset. So I guess my question then would be, you know, as we're talking about all this, I think everybody agrees on the value of parental engagement, but what are schools doing to kind of address any cultural kind of barrier, not barriers, but just cultural differences that are not going to be approached the same way? Because I do know, like, that's definitely a facet. And I know, Ilya, you said you're in, you know, this is an international school, and I'm wondering if that's something you've come across. And I wonder if that's something when you're doing an assessment, if you ask. I mean, I think you have to take it that one step back and say, you know, it's all well and good to be like, oh, we need more parental engagement. But if that's not going to be a dynamic that's going to be replicated in the home, or that child has been raised with, or that the parent is going to be comfortable with, how do you address that?
So before I jump on, I just wanted to see if Greg has any thoughts on that, and then I'll
kind of following up on what a few of you have mentioned, like in terms of like that engagement and welfare of the student. Sometimes I think it much depends on where the school is and what the neighborhood is like. I mean, there was a time in America where neighborhoods were often dissected by, at least in urban areas, by your ethnicity, your Italian area, Irish, the Jewish thing here, Hispanic, and whatever. But even so, if you move forward a couple decades, in certain areas, like the neighborhood knew what was going on. So like the math teacher was also the Little League coach, was this, and the teachers, and not just talking small town, but just for that school area. So you had those at the school that also had big, they were also active in the community, and they would talk. And so this is like pre-internet. So if Johnny was having a problem or showing something, that would be identifiable, and you could reach out to the parent. But you know, into this current day and age where we're in our devices, we don't have that community, or we're isolated. I mean, I'm even in my neighborhood now. I mean, I know my 80-year-old neighbors on one side, and we engage. You know, I mean, when I lived in Connecticut, I had kids in my neighborhood, and we kind of all knew what was going on. Prior to that, I lived in Pittsburgh, and that was even more of a neighborhood where you really knew everything. Yeah, you could just leave and go, and someone will take care of you somewhere. You don't have to worry about it. But and all the parents knew what was happening in the neighborhood. But I mean, now we have apps, right? Next Nextdoor is an app. Sorry, is an app here in America where you could kind of share and see what's going on in the neighborhood. But in terms of for that particular student that might show some signs of, they may need to be counseled in some fashion. That's a bit more lacking. Or you have so much now, because of internet, you have so much more privacy and things or in laws that we can't tell if so-and-so over there that we had a red flag. We had a red flag, well, we just can't tell them over there because we can't release that information if there's a red flag.
So
if I could just jump in for a second.
Yeah, please go. Sure.
I kind of experienced, I think, some of the problem, or witnessed it. I was fortunate to spend about 2.5 years on the Navajo reservation. And so many of the problems I saw in governance and society stemmed from us going in, destroying a clan system that was very effective, and trying to replace it with this Anglo system of governance and trying to teach them how their families should be structured. In a clan system, the uncles give out the discipline. So if you don't take those things into account, yeah, what did you find at the International University?
It goes back to the first point that I was making, is that schools, a function of schools that is never really announced or publicized. I think it's like fish in water. It's held so closely to the schools, is that there is a system of culture that is absolutely essential for a kid to be successful, for them to understand. I call it like the secret handshake, and it's so hard for a kid who grows up in one culture and transfers to another culture to figure out how to do well in school. I don't necessarily think that it's all about curriculum and academics, even from like IB to IB for these kids that do transfer around countries. They'll find just wildly different ways of interacting with teachers and of getting help and of what constitutes as cheating. I lived in Moscow and taught at a school in Moscow for 3 years. And the idea of what constitutes as cheating was comical to me, because I would look at a paper and I'm like, you clearly have taken this from your friend. And they're like, well, of course I did. They're like it was not like, why wouldn't I? They've already done it. It was just like, okay. And this thing, like yesterday I saw the vaccine, Russia was going to announce a Sputnik moment of the vaccine. And I thought, of course they did. Like it's the same sort of concept. But yeah, there's a system of culture that like the school doesn't have a cheating policy, so to speak. They'll say we have plagiarism, but even in Hong Kong, which is like a collective, much more of a collectivist environment, group study sessions, it's completely acceptable to show up to your friend's house and everybody works on the same project and then turns in, subtly different essays, so it doesn't look like plagiarism. And they'll say, well, I just use the thesaurus, and you've turned in the same essay. And they'll say, like, yeah, like it's just like even the idea of like what constituted as original thought or as original thinking is something that isn't. That's even apart from critical thinking. Like in Hong Kong, kids will say, like, yeah, we all did critical thinking together. And you're like, well, no, that's not how that works. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So also be mindful of time. I can see how this conversation could go on for the next 2, 3, 4 hours, right? And I promise that we'll think of ways of re-engaging very soon. I'd love to continue this. But let me go back to Christina's point and question, and I think everybody's sentiment on what I'm hearing from you all is how, I guess in my view as a practitioner and as a parent, how vastly different things are for different school districts. So let's say Bowles School District seems to be, seems to have some programs and some activities where parents are engaged, but also with some mixed results, if you will. Here in Hong Kong, for an international school community, you can see superficially a lot of engagement. Like, these fairs and different parent organized events, they bring a ton of people. But I notice how it's almost a celebration of parents' work. Like they put in the work, they organized everything, and they're all going around and patting themselves on the back. Whereas kids, they're like, I don't necessarily like this type of game. I'm not going to stand in line for 3 hours to get my candy, right? So like a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, is being, in my view, and think of it what you will, but in my view, a lot of this is superficial. And all the while, I want to point out that I heard from Elio and also from a few of you how technology has really created this isolation for us as humans. Okay, so I may be plugged in on WhatsApp groups with parents, right? But I'm not looking after my kids that that let's say that are walking around, and I don't expect that any other parents who are, let's say, in the neighborhood are going to say, oh yeah, I've seen them, they're over there, whatever, this is what's going on, don't worry, we got it, right? There is no we got it attitude anywhere, and particularly in communities that are otherwise look wonderful. They, trees, beaches, whatever. We got beautiful scenery over here. But yes, I feel like, and to Elio's point, you started sharing some links. I'm seeing the work of Jonathan Haidt on one channel that he's created is Heterodox Academy, where he's seeing how the influx of the K through 12 education then produces kids that go into colleges and they get offended too easily. They can't participate in debate. The critical thinking is pretty low, and that causes all sorts of additional problems where instructors in universities then are challenged to say something, controversial and all of a sudden, if they said something, they uttered their opinion or something that's fact-based, they get chastised and letters get written to administrators that, I got offended, they can't be saying these things. So I see the start of this, going back to this parenting issue, going back to building of communities. I actually see those communities shrinking. If anything, we're all beholden to our individual social circles. So I know, for example, that the family I'm friendly with here, who have got 3 girls, and us, we have 2 kids. We look after each other. So we know kind of how to coordinate. Should the kids be somewhere, we know how to help each other. Okay, but that's just the 2 families. I don't see, and I don't observe how, let's say, something as formal as Parent-Teacher Association produces the same results. Where, for example, the same mantra of, let's support critical thinking. Let's support social emotional development. Let's support more meaningful developmental programs for children are also being carried outside of the formal school environment. Okay, once the child leaves the school building, it's a completely diverse setting. I hear all of you saying that parents play such a huge role, but it seems to me we play it all differently. And this is where I think we're lacking this overall understanding of how to be an engaged parent. What are some of the critical fundamental components of how we can participate? Sometimes starting with ourselves, being kind to ourselves and being empathetic on our own behalf, advocating for ourselves, right? And then how do we translate that to our children? I see the breakdown with this technological barrier that we all have created. I see the breakdown in this communal engagement in a much more meaningful level. So I hope, Christina, I'm answering to some degree what question you posed. But to sum up, can I please ask you to think? Okay, so McRaven said there's going to be lack of critical thinking. There's going to be really a threat to the future of the United States, for example, in terms of what the next generation will be able to offer. We are picking up multiple layers of challenges. We're talking everything from the government level down to, let's say, policy level. I'm hearing some of the thoughts. We're talking about the school districts, school systems, down to how individual teachers deliver curriculum, what limitations exist on their capabilities in terms of just educating and making kids better citizens, better people, and then down to parents. You can see how this is a multi-layered problem. But Greg and I are sitting here, we're asking ourselves, how do I perform a security assessment on this facility? How do I teach you active shooter, knowing that it's such a diverse, a far grander problem for prevention of any harm to anyone. Okay, teachers, children, buildings, whatever this general setting is that we call the education system. Okay, at the same time, we're also asking ourselves, okay, so how do we, what are some of the fundamentals that we can enable our children with, right? Do we just take away their technology? Do we go back and re-educate parents? So my head is about to explode. I apologize because all of this is causing a lot of thoughts. Just to Christina's point, I'm learning from every one of you. share with us your closing remarks. What do you think is the pathway? Like right now, we've amalgamated a lot of thoughts, and we'll definitely continue this. What do you think now is the pathway? What can we do realistically, considering that, let's say, government will not change and it's not going to be a unified system and it's all going to be, somewhat different. Technology plays a huge role, both positive and negative. What are some of the fundamentals? Like, where do you see a child, let's say, from K to 12 education, moving on to a university setting or whatever it is that they want to do? What are the core enablement skills or whatever platform, springboard, if you will, that we can add to share with them and enable them with?
Are we going in order, or how does?
Well, you see, there's only what, 6 of us, 7. So it's not a huge group. Raise a hand and please go on.
That's okay, if nobody minds, I'd like to start.
Awesome, that's great.
So this goes back to, in addition to journalism, I also majored in political science. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because one of the most, for me, in terms of my studies and kind of where I went with my career later on, one of the most fundamental things I read was a 15-year study by an Australian political scientist called Judith Besant. And she studied how giving kids agency, usually within a system, either in a family or in a school, but she studied it within the school system, increased their likelihood for community and civic engagement later on in life. What the study revealed was, and she had a good point, she said in most Western democracies, we don't let kids decide anything. We tell them when they eat, when they play, when they go to school, when to sleep, and then we expect them to turn 18 or 21 or whatever the voting age is, and then we just expect them to like magically want to be participants and magically have this sense of responsibility for their community when we've given them no fundamental reason to. And so they took a cohort of students who and they gave them increasing agency as they progressed through the school system. So like in first grade, they decided on when was pizza day? And in second grade, they decided on classroom rules. And a lot of classes do this to some degree, but the agency increased as they increased through the educational system. So by the time they were in high school, they were deciding some pretty high level academic policy things. Now, to be fair, they were in Australia and that government's very amenable to experiments like this. But I really do believe that if you give kids increased agency at that level, if you, regardless of what the cultural aspects are at their home, regardless of that, and you do kind of build in that sense of internal responsibility for the community around them, because at the end of the day, their school is a community, their school is a system. And I really do think a fundamental part of building, emotional and mental resiliency, building the ability for adaptive thinking, building critical thinking, all of that comes to some degree to agency, to having the freedom and the ability to identify a problem and address it. Because critical thinking is analysis, but if you want to foster the creativity to address the critical, utilize critical thinking, it's that second step past analysis. And I do a lot of writing coaching with people in the tech space, and they're very good at critical thinking. They're extremely good at analysis. Building a narrative arc is a different thing. And that is where it takes agency. And that's where you have to break through a barrier. And that's often something I find myself teaching them. So I suppose to summarize it, I think if we instill more of a sense of independence and agency, but in such a way, it sounds kind of, counterintuitive, but you instill more agency so that there's more of an internalized responsibility for the community.
Greg and I are taking a note down for our next security assessment at schools. That's the question we're going to ask the admin. We're going to say, how are you instilling? I'm not joking. This is not sarcastic comment. I just want to thank you for what you shared, because I strongly agree with you. I think that as part of how we look at school organizations, I think it's one of the most meaningful way to engage in a conversation with a group of administrators at a school and talk about, okay, let's say you don't want to be the next target of a school shooting. Let's talk about how you deliver curriculum, how you teach, and some of the platforms and springboards that you offer to the students. Okay, because I couldn't agree more that agency plays a huge role. If you're able to self-advocate, if you're able to advocate for others, and that's another very interesting skill that I find among kids, that if they're able to advocate on behalf of others, that's also a very, very good indicator that they're actually growing and they have they're being enabled. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would love to jump in actually.
Okay,
So,
Elio and then Julie.
yeah. So you mentioned agency and you mentioned earlier active shooter, and I've attended so many of those trainings from Homeland and FBI locally, and given them some feedback, which it's been interesting to see some of that actually integrated into the trainings, the later trainings. But in a scenario, and these are still super rare, like we honestly, people are terrible at risk assessment. Bruce Schneider has some amazing writing on people are normally awful and they're terrified of a plane crash, but they'll hop in a car even when they're super tired or when they've had a few drinks, like it's nothing. And if you look at the numbers, probably going to die in the car by several X more, than the plane crash. Plane crash is pretty rare. And then if you throw kids into the mix, you add another 10 to 100X multiplier on how skewed people are in their assessment of risk. So in a scenario though, again, let's assume this could actually happen. Again, super rare. You're going to have to make those decisions. You're not necessarily going to have a teacher to tell you what to do. And so some of the trainings and there's mixed, because they're so rare, there's mixed results. Like you don't necessarily want to tell all the kids like, oh, someone could come in and shoot you up. That's really stressful. It puts a burden on the kids. My mom had a thing, actually. I grew up in the 80s when they had the whole stranger danger scare rather. And she walked a fine line between getting my sister and I to understand a little bit of that, but not harping on it so much. You see some kids that are just terrified of the world because, oh God, someone's going to jump out of a van at any time and snatch them up. And it's like that, it happens, but it's pretty rare. So you do need to prepare kids, but you also need to not harp on it so much and have monthly trainings. Like this is definitely going to happen next month or next year. It's not, maybe it will, maybe the school will get hit by lightning too. You want to have the administrators and the teachers be prepared, but you have to be careful about how much of that leaks to the students. But if you give them that base of agency where they're used to making their own decisions and really thinking through problems, that'll be enough preparation where they should be able to handle it. And you give them just some basics. The other thing that I found really interesting, and I want to touch on, I have a few notes here, is we talked about cheating. I think it was Rick talking about cheating. And as someone in tech where there is no problem that is going to be vaguely interesting, that's going to be like one guy writing the software, it's going to be a team. Like any really interesting thing is a whole team of people working together.
Yeah.
And so we spend the entire career saying, no, don't look at their paper. Don't talk to her. Don't, and then when they get into the industry, we spend at least the first few weeks, if not the rest of their career, being like, hey, you guys work together better, learn how to be healthy about how you work together. Because if you're trying to go solo, you're a liability for us, for the company, for the team, and you're annoying to work with. Like, it's insane that we discourage true collaboration. To me, the cheating thing is about intent. If you have kids working together and collaborating to solve a problem, that's beautiful. That's setting them up to be very successful in a later career. If you have one kid just copying and not learning anything, not talking to their kid and doing it just because they don't want to do the work, I'll let him do the work, that's a bad thing. So it's intent. Is there an intent to deceive? Is there an intent to not do anything? Or is there true collaboration? And I would love to see educational models where you allow and even encourage that collaboration. And we've done stuff at like Code Day. We occasionally have kids go, just work on a project all by themselves. But normally we say, look, find a team. And honestly, like if you're willing to, maybe find a team that's not your friends, because there's a certain dynamic with your friends where if maybe if that's what you guys do anyway, maybe you get together and maybe you program together. And I've seen some amazing games written outside of Code Day, shocking Scratch game that was like, oh yeah, we spent 3 years on this. I'm like, okay, yeah, there's no way you're getting that done in one night. But the teams that are kids that have never met each other, and you get one kid who's really good, maybe she's a phenomenal artist, and then maybe she's a good programmer, and then maybe he's really good at doing music, and then maybe she's really good at organizing and kind of planning, and just you get people with different backgrounds. And when we've actually done a tiny bit we've had certain people, I can't remember the names right now, from different companies, give brief 15 minutes like project management classes to the kids. We do like intro classes sometimes that are like 15 minutes. We'll do 3 of them. Everyone goes through every 15-minute class, and then we let you get going. And it's amazing how much faster they're able to move and how much less conflict there is when they learn some basic project management principles, and they learn how to, okay, so you're going to take care of the art, and then you're going to take care of some of the code, and you're going to take care of the music and whatnot, and divide and conquer. And it works really well, because when we don't have that, we see them all working on separate stuff and kind of fighting each other. And then they get to a point late in the night where it's like, how do we get this all together? Wait, that's not going to work with what I did. And then chaos and tears. So that's something that I would love to see. And then the last thing I will say, I guess two things very quickly. Take away the tech? No, obviously not. We're in a world full of technology. No one else is giving up the tech. We need to figure out how to utilize the tech. And I make a big distinction between you using the tech to solve problems, or Facebook, Twitter style, where there's an algorithm and the tech is using you to make a profit. There's a big difference there. General purpose computing is amazing. We should definitely empower kids to solve their own problems, but they need to, and the last thing I want to touch on is adversarial thinking. It's not just critical thinking, but adversarial thinking is something we taught. The cyber warfare range that I was part of, is a huge thing, was getting people into that mindset of not every communication that you see is benign, truthful, etc. But think about, maybe not all the time, and don't fixate, but think about, wait a minute, is there an ulterior motive, or could there be one? And I love, again, going back to Schneider, I love his thing about this whole, oh, don't talk to strangers. That's terrible advice. Your success in your career later on is directly dependent on you talking to lots of strangers all the time. You should be speaking, getting up there, sharing your knowledge, meeting new people. The good version of this is, it's fine to talk to strangers. If you're a little kid, if you're 6 and you're lost, find an adult that looks like they're going to help you and go ask for help. They're probably going to help you find your parents. If an adult comes to you, that's weird. That's not how it works. Adults just don't approach 6-year-olds in our culture. And you should take that mentality into later life. All these phishing scams that are rampant now, if someone comes to you, what's their angle? Why are they approaching you? And what do they want out of this interaction? But if you go to them, if you make the choice, most of the time you'll probably be okay, as long as you're the one initiating the contact. So I'll stop there, though.
Thank you. I'll try to keep all of that in mind when I try to summarize your points. Thank you. Julie.
Yes, so this is perfect, because I'm agreeing with Christina and Elio very much in that I feel like, first, when I was talking about challenge-based thinking, I definitely was not talking about throwing all standardization out the window, in that I was talking about using, because there have to be certain standards to know what goals and what students, right, at each grade level ideally should be learning. But I'm saying changing the strategy into creating opportunities for agency and having kids engage with struggle and being okay with struggle. What happens right now with our current system and with rethinking grades, I don't want to come off as too crazy. Sorry, Mr. Schwarz on our governing board there. Don't think I'm too crazy, but grades sometimes...
I'm the crazy one on the governing board, I think.
Well, grades can sometimes be a detriment. And I do understand. My kids go to a pretty innovative school in Phoenix Union that doesn't use a traditional grading system, but they have to then translate their grades at the end to traditional to meet transcripts. But the reality is grades put a strange label that's very much tied to a student's identity, and there's so much information loaded in a grade that I do have a lot of agreement in some ways with the Montessori system, with the idea of descriptive type grading for certain types of assignments and certain types of activities, because really we want kids to have agency. We want them to struggle. We want them to have to reach out for help. So that means also rethinking assessment. I ask all the time of teachers, and I ask this of our tech coach, when we're thinking about secure browsers and this kind of thing. It's like, why are you creating a test that requires a secure browser? Why aren't we creating authentic opportunities to demonstrate learning where kids should have to work for that answer? If they work hard for an answer and are gaining deep knowledge about a topic, that is much more meaningful than worried about whether there's an A, B, C, or D type of a thing. I mean, my college student knows, basically knowing about metadata, I'm sure she was laughing, saying, well, half the students are cheating through certain art history classes because they can just look at the metadata and all the information's there. So it's one of those things where creating opportunities for authentic assessment, grading, agency, struggle, having those standards, but having creative ways to get to where we're going, and encouraging students to talk back. I'm not saying in a disrespectful way, but even with my own kids, occasionally, if they have to talk back, I have to think, in their future, do I want them to always be meek and mild? Raising girls, in my case, right? Do I want them to grow up where people tell them, no, you get over there and do that and do it now? Or do I want them to sometimes say, why do I have to go over there? Okay, well, that's a valid question. Why do you? Let's talk about why it's better, right? Or why I think you should do this or that. So I think we need to teach kids to question. And those are the only ways we're going to get them, teach them to learn to make decisions. And that's why I was bringing that up before. They have to learn to make decisions. If we're always giving them the information and then asking them to regurgitate, and conditioning parents to do the same, to where if we push kids, parents push back and say, no, it's too hard for my kid, you're being too hard on them, you're being too mean to them, they came home upset. Parents also need to appreciate the struggle. We need to teach societally, we've got to appreciate the struggle. I mean, those of us that work in IT, that's our entire day. You have to find some fun in it. And some days you go home and you never sleep until you solve it. And then it's the big adrenaline rush, right? When you solve it. And it's usually because you reached out to 100 other people, read it, whatever. I think finally, too, we have to rethink about how kids are looking at social media. We're all feeling, and from our generation, like, oh, the computer, too much, they're disengaged. I think if we asked our teenagers, they would say, no, we're extremely engaged. And they are solving a lot of problems about topics that actually interest them. They're not topics that interest us, but they're topics that interest them. I got home today and I heard, oh, I didn't do anything today because I got home and the alarm was on. I was like, you guys didn't go outside? Well, we were playing with a whole group of us. We were designing a whole thing on Minecraft and it just got out of control. And it's like, woof. And I questioned, should I be like, what are you doing, Minecraft? But I was like, no, that's their opportunity to be with their friends. They were highly social. It doesn't look social to me, but they were highly social. They were solving problems all day and building a city. I don't know, what did I do all day in comparison? And so I just think we have to be cautious in looking at how they perceive it, and also really trying to create those opportunities as educators and getting parents in the loop, rethinking how we do school. We can still have standards and we can still have systems, but we need to really, I think, rethink learning. What does learning look like and what does that mean, as opposed to what does it always look like and what are we comfortable with? I think that's important.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Rick, you're on mute, so you'll go after Todd. Todd, can you please share with us your closing thoughts? What is the pathway? What is the springboard? How can we do better for our kids?
So
Oh,
that was to Todd.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to be sure. Yeah, go ahead, Todd. I started laundry earlier, and it's just so noisy in the background. So hopefully it'll be done in a second.
I think agency is critical, and it ties in with the critical thinking. There's, and the challenge for us, I think, will be finding the programs and technology to do it with. Like I said, I think part of that is going to be getting mom and dad tech savvy, because we don't want the computer to replace mom and dad. We don't want the socialization of the family to be replaced by socialization with friends too soon. It'll happen soon enough. I've got to say, in this state, so much of what we are limited in doing, and I don't want to make excuses. I'm going to get to a moment of hope. A legislature that thinks teaching citizenship is how many amendments are there to the Constitution? Who is George Washington? Nothing about, let's have a discussion about how our economy works. We have generations of people in this country that are economically illiterate, and that's a problem. And in this state, you can only teach the free enterprise system. you're not allowed to teach comparative economics. That's insane. But what I see as hope is a generation of kids that if you thought they were disengaged, look out at what's been happening in the streets of America for the last 75 days. And you see people who are engaged, people who are motivated, people who are connected, people who are problem solving. Sure, there's 1 or 2% are bad. That's true everywhere. But I see a lot of hope in the generation and more thinking of the collective good and the commons than what we've seen from, sadly, my generation.
Thank you so much. Very good points. Rick, did your laundry stop making noises?
You'll have to tell me if you can hear it in the background. But
Please
but
go
look,
on.
I'll make it a point to speak more clearly. I think two things come to mind. If I could approach a school in terms of the future and security and what would be useful, I'd ask two questions. I made that sound really specific, but is integration, and I mean cultural integration and like working alongside a student who has bipolar disorder or OCD or depression and anxiety. Let's just take anxiety. Like that's a really challenging emotion for kids to deal with, and it's just almost normative in a school. And I would ask them if it's okay somehow to be sure that it's not just theater when it comes to integration. So there's a lot of parents who will say, I don't want my kid learning next to that kid because that kid has problems. And if you look at the research really clearly, if you put high performing kids in a room and then you put low performing kids in that room, the lower performing kids get better and the higher performing kids keep going. So there is some data that might say that they could go further. It's really not clear. But that's not what is the felt expectation by parents. If you were to put a bunch of low performing students into a school or just one or two into a classroom, it's almost guaranteed that there's parents that are going to say, I don't want that kid in my room. And there's teachers that have to struggle with that. So culturally, integration is, parents really would like an insulated school where I went to the best school with the best students and the best teachers. And they all measure that based on like, well, they all kind of look like me and they all kind of talk like me and they all kind of act like me. And that's not what the kids' futures look like. And I think that does endanger the future of, like in the polarization, I know in America is a really big deal right now. And it's so much more about just general differences than it is about any specific differences, right? Like, I just don't know how to be around somebody who's anxious. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was a class on like mental health in the school? Like, this is what depression is like. This is how long it usually lasts, stuff like that. So that would be the first aspect. Like, is your learning support program a theater? Is it a sales pitch? Or is it something that's genuinely embraced? And schools will tell you, oh, it's genuinely embraced. And then if you look at the way that it's practiced in the classroom, it's rarely is it integrated. And those differences matter because school is about so much more than attaining facts. And I think the second part that's really interesting, in your perspective, when you go talk to school administrators, if you were to ask an administrator, like, hey, what's the most important thing that you do at this school? Like, what can you be seen doing every day? And then you ask the teachers that, and then you ask the kids that, and you ask like the grade level leaders that, you're going to have like 5 or 6 different answers. And, like the administrators are going to say, like, keep parents happy. That's our number one goal because we're a privately funded school and we can't have that funding, parents pulling out to go to the fancier school. And if you ask teachers, like, what's your most important job? They might say something like, well, they might say keep the parents happy too, but really you wouldn't know. You might have a teacher say like, well, deliver quality instruction. And then if you look at like, well, what can you be seen doing every day? And they're just doing a lot of like YouTube video lessons and like, okay, guys, go work on your project. It's never been clear to me how a kid is supposed to know how to be successful in school when there's so many different competing agendas. I mean, a vision statement is useful and a mission statement is useful to unite around. But I think in terms of like, hey, what does your job look like every day, to an administrator or to a head of school? I mean, their job should look a little bit different, but I think it all should be in service of one primary task, you know, whether it's securing the wellness of students or education. And those aren't necessarily obvious in the vision statements, because if you go into the classroom, there's this idea of like street level bureaucracy where teachers just like to shut the door and do what they think is best. And while that's useful in some cases to have that flexibility, the disorganized and segregated way that plays out in schools really leaves kids at quite a disadvantage at how to interact with each other, because, well, my teacher said this and my teacher did that. And then like one principal is really focused on like athletics and another principal is really focused on academics, and they should support each other. Reality is that they don't tend to do that well. And so what ends up happening, I've seen, is that you have like the preferred school and then it goes even smaller. Then they'll say, well, that's the teacher you want in that school. And then if you get that teacher in that school, then you want to be sure you go on this grade level trip to this country to do this service project. And the parents really like to filter their kids they like to pigeonhole them into a particular spot. Whereas they're not going to have that luxury. And like we all know, like they're going to be involved with people who are barely hanging in there, hanging on by their fingernails, you know, as soon as they get to university, and they're just not going to know what to do. It might even be the kid, you know, finding himself like, I work with so many kids that have gone away to college and then they come back for a year and they're just like, it was way too much. And they've never even really been exposed to other kids that have been in those positions. So they don't even have an idea of what coping might look like, you know. And of course I'm taking on a perspective of, I'm working with kids that the system has really failed them and they're stuck in their houses and not going to school. So I would love to see the school say to me like, hey, we've got a seat for her that she's welcome to come to anytime she's ready, you know. But that's not what I get. What I get is like, we need her 4 out of 5 days a week and we need her to do 3 of the 4 assignments. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense for her, you know. And so the schools need this flexibility, and they also at the same time they need to have this singular vision that does accommodate for everyone to actually be involved, like to actually have a kid who has ADHD and to have some sort of way for that kid to interact with the other students, and for the parents to be engaged in a way that their kids feel safe around that student. You know, he's impulsive, he throws stuff. Like, yeah, like, have you ever been to an office? Like, guess what happened? Like, like people storm out, people quit, people flick their boss off. Like, that's what happens. We need to learn how to like, just not even how to manage it or cope with it. We just need to learn how to like be around it, right? Like, if the first time you're ever exposed to a teacher who says you're an absolute jerk is in university, like, it's a big surprise, I think, for kids to realize that like, a lot of adults have lied to them for a long time because the school thought it was so important to be sure that those parents show up and pay their fees that we're not gonna really challenge his behavior. We're just gonna like put him in a different room or give him like a pull-out service or something like that. You know, I think it would be really important for schools to understand the role of cultural inclusion and differences as they move forward, because what's happening is it's becoming increasingly like, you can see the disparity now. Like my work is typically 1-to-1, and that's limited to people that could afford the time. And so I'm going to be teaching pretty much 1-to-1 for the next 6 or 7 months. It's what it looks like. And unless I actively go out and seek out people who couldn't afford it, the disparity gap is, with my 10 students or 15 students, has just grown another few inches. And that's not something that they're going to necessarily be able to make up by going to a better school or a better university.
Thank you. Again, lots to learn for us. Greg, last words.
Okay. Well, two elements. One is on the educational side and looking what would be a great way of moving forward. And I actually have to look at my experiences when I lived in Israel. I was there for 9 years. I didn't go to school there, but as an adult. And there, the school curriculum is pretty much nationalized, apart from the religious schools. A lot of parent involvement. And like by the time kids are seniors, they're kind of prepping for their military service, but their academic load is at maybe like what a freshman in college or sophomore is, because it's high academics. Some years back, there was a book called Startup Nation by Dan Senor, where he looked at why is Israel such a success story of all this tech innovation and all these companies just coming out. And he looked at, well, there's other countries that have compulsory military service, and there's other countries that have this or that, but why is it just there? And a lot of it is just that the ability to process. The country knows, again, right now there's a lot of political turmoil, but the country knows how to process its youth and prepare them, and it's continuous to some degree. So that's like to model that Israeli system. That would be interesting, but also is the national character of always arguing and creative discontent. I mean, and even though there's that 3-year military obligation, Israelis don't like authority. Okay, you tell them to do something. Wow, who said? Always challenge. Always a challenge. And actually, if in Talmudic study, you're always asking questions. It's all about questions and questions and questions. Always question. Always question. Yeah, who said it? Always. Is there a better way? There has to be a better way. That's that whole country. Now, you can see the fruits of that with the success of a lot of technical innovations and exits, as to use the tech term. Now, on the active shooter front, I should say, and although in Israel you don't have to worry about that so much because there's an armed guard with a magnetometer at every entrance, and bomb-resistant glazing on the windows. Here, we do have to make the difference between, there's some active shooters that evolve from maybe a school setting or in high school that they're disenchanted with everything, and they, as we see in Columbine, and then, but also it sometimes happens externally, where someone, for their own reasons, it's like, okay, I'm going to target a school. They never went to the school, don't know anyone at the school, but they're going to target the school. So that's something to keep in mind, that it's not always like that internal threat, or we didn't notice with how so-and-so was behaving or what they were saying, and this is what their intention was. I mean, you could do everything 100% perfect. Again, small chance, low probability, high consequence. And that's just, as Bruce Schneider would even say, low probability, high consequence. But, moving forward in preventing such things, yes, as security professionals and consultants, understanding that, like, how the school manages with parents, I would say. Like, well, what is that home life in a way where, but presenting it in a way, or asking in a way where it's not so intrusive. I think that's the big issue there. But that's essentially my 2 cents.
Thank you. So to summarize, I've heard the word agency. I've heard the word being a cognizant user of tech and not being abused by tech or used by tech. Creating inclusion and diversity and differentiation and integration that I'm hearing from Rick. I'm hearing that this sense of building in I guess integrating also the community of administrators and teachers with the community of parents. So there has to be continuity. It seems like I'm hearing, at least from some of you, these thoughts. And talking about the ability to dive into deeper issues in society, even at an earlier age, before you go to college. Something that Todd brought up, like being economically literate, being financially literate, and because that kind of expands your zone of your comfort zone, if you will. And I think all of that I wholeheartely agree with. What I'm thinking about is perhaps for our next conversation, we could talk about, okay, so these thoughts are all valid. One thing that security industry struggles with quite a bit, even as we deliver our advice, is the how. So the question of, okay, if I tell parents, okay, go and be more engaged, how do you become more engaged? If you tell children, be better critical thinkers, how do you become better critical thinkers? If you say, fine, how do we, I guess, expand and upgrade our systems of education in terms of this continuity, right? How do you do that? So I think that for our next conversation, it would be lovely for us to engage in this. I don't know whether it's going to be a debate or if it's going to be a collective agreement, if you will. But I'd love to ask a few questions around that for if we do have our next get together. So until then, I am very privileged that you all very generously donated 2 hours of your time and several hours in preparation for this conversation. I'm really grateful that you each are in different time zones. You guys are really, very engaged and sharing so much. And Elio has been behind the scenes sending out tons of links, and I hope that they will be visible as the video is recorded. If not, then I'll definitely pull them down and I'll share them as we publish the video. But I'm very, very grateful, and thank you so much to all of you for participating, for sharing your thoughts. And until the next time, I wish for all of you to stay safe, to look after yourselves and your families and your loved ones. And I hope to engage with you very soon. Thank you all. Be safe.